tardes, bienvenidos una vez más al canal de YouTube del Instituto Cervantes de Leeds en Manchester. Mi nombre es Pedro Eusebio, soy el director de estos centros del Instituto Cervantes en el norte de Inglaterra y esta tarde tenemos el inmenso placer de tener la presencia de tres grandes poetas, dos españoles, Eduardo Moga y Mario Martín Gijón, y el poeta y traductor Terence Dooley. Good evening welcome to the YouTube channel of Leeds and Manchester Instituto Cervantes channels. My name is Pedro Eusebio. I am the director of these cultural centers in Northern England. And today we are in a new edition of our poetry readings, which are always a very central, very essential part of our cultural program. This evening, we are going to celebrate the literature, poetry of two very prominent Spanish poets, Eduardo Moga, welcome, and Mario Martín Gijón, welcome also. And also we will have the participation of the translator and poet himself, Terence Dooley. As I said, these poetry readings where we discuss about poetry are very important for Instituto Cervantes for obvious reasons, but especially for the Manchester and Leeds Institute, because we have around the year, every month we have at least two poetry readings when we can discuss and experience how important is the poetry for everyday life and how important it is also in order to understand a different culture. In that sense, poetry is always a bridge between different cultures, and tonight we will see and we will experience that very clearly with our guests. Now we will introduce our guests. First of all, Eduardo Moga. Eduardo Moga holds a degree in law and a PhD in Hispanic philology from the University of Barcelona. He has published several collections of poems, including, among others, La Luz Oída, which was Adonais Prize in 1996, Las Horas y los Labios, Cuerpo sin mí, Bajo la piel los días, Insumisión, which was in 2013 the winner of the Quimera Magazine Prize for the best poetry book of the year, El Corazón, la Nada, Antología Poética 1994-2014, Muerte y Amapolas en Alexandra Avenue, Mi Padre, which is the book that we are presenting tonight here in Instituto Cervantes, and Tú no morirás. He is also a translator and literary critic for Letras Libres, Cuadernos Hispanoamericanos, Turia, and Quimera. And he is also a regular contributor to La Sombra del Ciprés, the cultural supplement of the Norte de Castilla, a very important newspaper of this region of Spain. He has published the travel books and several volumes of the same. Most recently, just to mention some of them, El Oro de la Síntesis and the anthology Streets Where to Walk is to Embark, Spanish Poets in London, 1811 to 2018. Thank you very much, Eduardo, for being with us again. Our second guest is Mario Martín Gijón. He's a poet and literary critic also. He holds a PhD in Spanish philology and has taught at the Philipps University of Marburg in Germany and the Masaryk University in Brno in the Czech Republic. He currently teaches at the University of Extremadura in Spain. As a poet, Mario has published Latidos y Desplantes, Rendición, translated by Terence Dooley into English, and Surrendering, which is the book that we are presenting tonight, and Tratado de Extrañeza, translated the Encanto in 2019. Some of his poems have been translated into English, French, Italian, German, Polish, Romanian, and Chinese. Thank you very much. Mario will be with us tonight. And our third guest is Terence Dooley, who has translated 30 or so contemporary Spanish poets for Shearman books and for UK magazines, including MPT, Long Poem Magazine, Poetry London, and The High Window. Three of his translations have been Poetry Book Society choices. His own poem, Chocoloro, will be published later this year in a bilingual edition with Eduardo Moga's translations by Los Papeles de Brighton. I would like also to mention and thank again Terence because he also presented at the Instituto Cervantes Manchester and Leeds in September 2020 the poetry anthology 10 contemporary Spanish women poets, a great book that you have not yet read. It's very worth to read because it's a super work in poetry, but also the translation that Terence made of it. Thank you very much, Terence, with being with us. I would like also to say that you will have the chance to put your questions in our chat at the end of the dialogue between Eduardo and Mario, and you can put your questions in English, but if you feel more comfortable, you can also, we have some people in our audience who will prefer to put the questions in Spanish. You are very welcome. We will translate, or we also ask in Spanish, and then we will make a translation in English. Thank you very much again to our guests. Thank you to our audience. It's a real pleasure. It's a great honor for us. And as I said at the very beginning, it is very, very important for Instituto Cervantes, those poetry readings that we have every month. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. And the floor is yours, Terence.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm delighted that we're able to launch at last Mario Martín Gijón's Surrendering Rendición. It's been out for some time in the UK, and it's had many appreciative reviews in lots of good magazines, and a much appreciation that I've had from readers too. It seems on the face of it rather difficult poetry, in a way, because it's language poetry. It has, in a Paul Celan-like way, it uses portmanteau words, or it includes words inside other words, or it provides lines with different interpretations. But on the whole, it's a sequence of love poetry, and it's a sequence where the lover is absent, and the poet misses her and wants to write about her. I think that's true, isn't it, Mario? Would you like to say some more about it? I wonder if Mario would...
Yeah, first of all, thank you. Yeah, it's, as Terence said, it's been 2 years since the publication of Surrendering. Well, it was the COVID between, but well, that is so late give us the occasion to present with Eduardo book, which is more recent, so it's a welcome occasion. And yeah, as Terence said, it was some reviews quite positive, and I don't know the appreciation of the other readers, but I was quite satisfied with the reception, and as I say, it was a welcome occasion to launch the book at the end and to read in bilingual poems, and to speak about the translation. That was certainly not easy, I guess. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Shall we read some poems, and then we could maybe talk when we get to the ones that present translation problems, we could talk about them then. Would you like to start reading, and so people can hear the poems?
As you said, in my poetry, there are always different paths of reading. So I will start with the poem La Promesa, also the promise, and as we speak about before, I read my original and you read your second original. Well, because it's a poem on the song. La promesa de medirte a tu me dio fuerza esperanzada para seguir, apalabrando la labranza, trazando los surcos de tu cuerpo ausente, repartiendo semilla en la tierra baldía.
The promise of saying you, the promise of saying you, serving you, surveying you, gave me hope and strength to continue, to contain you, giving my word, ploughed ground, following the furrows of your absent body, sowing seed on barren land.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to point out in this poem, it was like like literary allusion at the end, because La Tierra Baldía, as you all probably know, it's the translation of Eliot the Wasteland, but you decide for barren land, so it's different. It's not that so Eliot, yeah.
Yeah, it means the same, but
yeah. Well, as, always something gets lost and something gets won in translation. Yeah. But this is the good thing on the bilingual edition like this one is that you can see. But on the other way, I like more this barren land because this is more similar to Baldia. That's well. It's like it's always so difficult to choose for the translator. So I admire the person like you that are so brave to
sometimes I'm influenced by the Spanish sounds as well. That one should be perhaps have an echo of the Spanish sounds, although the language is so different.
Yeah, because I saw in this case you could choose between waste and barren, but barren is like a much more approximate to the sound, and I find it right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if you want to comment with this point or another point. So
well, maybe we go on to sacrificio.
Yeah. Okay. So sacrificio sin fe. Aterrado de tierra sin tus huellas, caminé hoy por las afueras de tu nombre. El aire traía un olor a quemado lor. Enervado sacrifiqué en el ara de tu ausencia, de los cielos propiciatorios.
Burnt offering, terrified by terrain untrodden by you, I wandered through the suburbs of your name. The irate air bore embers of scorched pain. Weak I sacrificed on the altar of your absence from heaven in propitiation. Mm-hmm. There I did another echo of the Spanish. When you've got el aire traía, I put irate, which isn't really in meaning in your poem, but I'm echoing the sounds there, the irate air.
Yeah, I like it that much because it's a word not so common in English, isn't it? The irate, no? But ira. But well, in Spanish it's the same, ira, no? Ira, air. So it's like I like it, this alliteration. And well, too, this, terrified, terror, and untrodden. It's like this. This suggests, the hardship of the walking around in the suburbs. Well, we go on to the next one.
Yeah.
Which is... So it's mis ojos abandonados de tu entorno, los al aire encinto de lo ya muerto, como rémoras morando, sin bocadas a la voz muda de mis dedos.
My eyes abandoned, donated by to your presence, lost in the air, instinct with death, hindrances dwelling, in dances dwelling, without love. I go without, I live without love, I lose the use of the mutable voice of my pen.
Something to comment or no? It's like I was asked at the beginning, how I read these poems, and I am always thinking about it. Because some friends tell me I should read all the possible paths, like in this case, mudable, But I think in every occasion that I had to read, I choose one path, not the both paths, not to read, because it will be too long to converse on something. So I read like I feel in this.
That's good, because I was wondering how to do it really. So I tried to include both when I was reading in the translation.
Yeah, it's complicated to include both of them.
Yeah.
A friend told me my poems will be read by several persons, so one read a part, but I think that's too much time. So in life we have to choose one path, one or the other. So in a reading it's the same,
and we want to hear the poet's voice anyway.
Yeah,
and that gives us the meaning.
Yeah, so let's go to trabajando. Yeah, striving. No, sueño estival. Desnudo en torno a mí, hiciste tuve falsamente, mientras dormía fuiste.
Summer dream, nude, no, you not surround me, not me, fraudulent to me, sleeping, you were mine, only a moment. That one's quite difficult to read, I suppose. I could read it more less jarringly. Nude, no, you'd not surround me, and not me, fraudulent to me, sleeping, you were mine, only a moment.
Well, yeah. You told me as you were translating my poems, you told me once that in English it was difficult to translate love poetry, because you told sometimes this subject, so it was difficult, that it doesn't sound like silly. You told me that could you explain why you think that this is because I asked you because a friend of mine that she's translating, well, in fact she's finishing, she's now looking for a publishing house. She translated re-invention in Polish, and she told the same about Polish, like that it was difficult to speak about love without sounding like kids, or the opposite, like rude.
Yes, no, that's it in a way, but I think it's nice to have these love poems. It just doesn't seem to be particularly the fashion in English. There's not much romance around in English poetry at the moment.
Yeah, the more romancing, like pop music or something like
that's right, it goes into songs.
So it's
anyway, let's go on to Sweet Sal Dulce, shall we?
Yeah, this is Sal Dulce, like this one. Sal dulce de tu cuerpo, para ven ir tan lejos, que te hable junto al mío.
Sweet salt of your body, to come so far, I find your wound, your sound next to mine.
Yeah, here I see it's like practically impossible, no? Like sal. Spanish is salt, but it's too like the infinitive, salir, no? Go out,
Yeah.
no? Go out of your body. But it was like, but I say something get lost and something get gone, always in translation.
It could become sweetly from your body, couldn't it? Well, or come out sweetly. Yeah, but
we have the original next to the translation. So
yeah.
So let's go to the next one. Sos nada, secreto de mis noches más oscuras, con tu ósculo soñado sobre mi cuerpo, rêve niant.
Dream lover, secret ghost, stolen from my night, obscure me, cure me with your kiss, sound wound on my skin, no thing, haunting, revenant. We've got another thing in your poetry here, which is macaronics. It's called, isn't it? You'd like to introduce French or German or other language words into your Spanish.
Yeah, but this has a biographical reason, but because as you know, I was living for a couple of years in France and for almost 5 years in Germany. And this language still resounds in my head. So and I read, of course, a lot of literature in this language, and sometimes I guess now we have Google Translator. Everyone can seek for the meaning of a word, no? Okay, some. There are not
word,
so
but
many.
not a sentence. Google isn't very good at grammar, but individual words is fine.
Next one. Yeah. Erblindes son heute admiro con ojos sajados por las horas ahorradas al horror que ahora vuelve ya sin salida hacia el vacío ego.
Erblindes schon heute, blind now today, I blink at you through eyes with her, withered, erased, razored by hours, saved from the terror, our terror, now washing back tearingly into my empty eye.
Yeah, I think here we should comment that this Erblinden von heute is a quote, no, from a famous poem of Paul Celan, no. We decide to put at the end of the word, like you say, no, a short note of quote, saying the lines which came out of Celan, and yeah, in fact, some critics had mentioned this proximity with Celan, but if you read Surrendering, Celan is only present at the last part of the book, because I will not say this influence, but a confluence, I would say, because in fact I was not so familiar with the poetry of Celan till not so long ago, but a friend of mine said that he remembered it of Celan, so I began to read Celan in the original, no, in German, because I have read, of course, Celan a long time ago in Spanish, and well, it's because so I like better to speak of confluence and not influence, but in this last part there are an ongoing dialogue with some poems by Celan, and this Erblindes son heute is a poem about the madness of Hölderlin, and I approximated that with the madness of the lover in some moments when he's not with, he's looking for the love.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I suppose the Celan connection is not a collection, but the similarity, the resemblance is in Celan coined many new words made of two or more words. So there's that sort of inwardness of language. That would be why people compare you.
Yeah, but I mean, they are like a friend told me recently. Yeah, I see a big influence of Celan in your work, and I told her, but yeah, in my first book there is already this part, this writing, like I don't know how to call it, rupturis, but and in this first book, Latidos of Ides Plantes, I haven't read still Celan, so it's like, yeah, a familiarity, a confluence, and not a direct influence, except in some later poems. Well.
Right.
In any case, I am happy if the people put me next to a great like Celan. I can agree.
Yeah. Are we going on to Sigo
Yeah.
Ciego? Is that?
It's not. Well, it's lack. Well, reconocimiento.
Oh, we're gone. Oh, right. Okay.
I think there was all. Well, it's not. Reconocimiento. Quel deine Augen cendí tus palabras del tiempo tendido, las puertas, tentado por lo oscuro, mis heridas en el bálsamo, que tu piel bailando y hier werf ich ein Herz, das Geweih unter Menschen gendrara el rencor, hendido por la daga, nada en el desprecio del nacer para conocerte.
Right. Connaissance, in quel deiner Augen, rapture, in rapture, words opened, listen to, time outlaid, the gates, tempted by the dark, nest, my hurts, mein Herz, with a balsam, amour in your skein, and hier werfe ich ein Herz, das geweiht unter Menschen, engenders rancor, courage, heart split by the flame dagger, nothing in despite of being born in your connaissance.
Yeah, here the quotation is of one of the most famous poems by Celan, is Love the Fernen, in place of distance is the English translation, and it's a poem dedicated to Ingeborg Bachmann, the another Austrian poet. And yeah, I especially appreciate the love poetry of Celan. No, Celan is always remembered about the Todesfuge and the, of course, no, the poetry on the concentration camps. But I consider him one of the best poets about love of the last century. And well, this quotation are of this poem about his encounter with Ingeborg Bachmann. And it's the not the last, but the before last poem of surrendering.
It's been a great pleasure anyway, but I can only suggest that everybody goes out and buys this lovely book of yours, and I'm so pleased that we've had a chance to share it so long after publication.
Yeah, well, I am so grateful to you, because some friend of mine thought that my poetry was not impossible to translate, and you proved them wrong, so it was great. Well, so I don't know if we go on to Eduardo, or
yeah, maybe it's Eduardo's turn.
Yeah.
Yes, as I said, at the end, we will have the opportunity with a dialogue with Eduardo and Mario from if there are some questions from our audience. So please go ahead.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And it's also an honor to be doing this presentation at the Instituto Cervantes in Manchester and Leeds. It's also a particular pleasure to be with so good friends as Terence and Mario, whom I've known since many years ago. And we've worked together in many senses, translating, reading, and speaking about the other person's work. So it is a pleasure to be there, and I am more than happy to read those poems belonging to my father, which is the third book, actually, that I published in Shearman Publishing House, which I'm also very glad about, and I am very thankful again to introduce what I write in the UK. So I don't know, shall I start reading some poems, or maybe
I could just say briefly that I've worked with Eduardo on 3 books now. First, we did his selected poems. And he's a poet with an enormous range of styles and content, and that's a fascinating book, selecting from 7 or 8 of his previous Spanish books. Eduardo Moga selected poems with Shearman books. Then we also worked together on Eduardo's anthology of Spanish poets in London, Streets Where to Walk is to Embark. And there's masses of interesting stories and observations from Spanish poets exiled in London or in London from choice. A full picture of London, maybe in the 20th century, and then I was delighted when Eduardo sent me Mi Padre, my father. I was fascinated by, in a sense, how different it was from the other poems I'd translated of his, short prose poems, 1 to a page, very laconic. And unlike books about other people's fathers, which sometimes tend to be sentimental, this struck me as a hugely truthful portrait of your father. So maybe we could read it now.
Yeah, I'd like to say that you are totally right. It's a totally different book from my previous work, because I felt it had to be that way. I come from a sort of irrational or irrationalistic environment, literary environment and tradition, because that's what I like the most. I come from there, although I started writing poetry 30 years ago, so I hope I have evolved a lot, but I do come from there. And however, when I sat down to write this book, because I felt the urge of writing it, I felt simultaneously at the same time that it had to be different, that I had, in a way, to get rid of literature as I had somehow used it until that point, to make something different, to make something truer, to make something more passionate, and at the same time, more silent, more calm. It took me 30 years to be able to write this book, which is just a collection of memories of my father. The collection of memories about my father, of my father, that I keep. So in one of these poems, I say that no matter how hard I try, I can't remember anything else about my father, which is not true. I do have some more memories, but not too many. Most of them, I wouldn't dare to specify a percentage, but most of them, which are still in my head, are transformed, again, I hope, into poems. So very short, very laconic, very concentrated in a way. And as I hope you are able to see, you will be able to see, very naked, so nude of adjective, even metaphors, images, etc., 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 just to try to present the body of a man, the personality, the human being, with blood and flesh and virtues and vices that my father was, as any father is. So mi padre tenía el pelo blanco. Yo también tengo el pelo blanco. El pelo encanece por oxidación.
My father had white hair. I have white hair too. Hair goes white from oxidative stress.
Well, I think this poem does not require any comment since you're seeing me. Huh? So there is nothing else to say. Mi padre tenía muy larga la uña del meñique izquierdo. Decía que los mandarines se dejaban crecer las uñas para demostrar que no hacían trabajos manuales. Él vendía cosas.
My father let the nail on the little finger of his left hand grow long. He said mandarins would let their nails grow long to show they didn't do manual work. He sold things.
My father was a sort of, he was a very humble man. He came from a very poor family, as this book shows, or tries to show. But his condition improved throughout his life a little bit, enough to have a son and to give him an education, etc. But he always had in mind the idea of improving. He always wished to belong to a higher social class than he actually belonged to. And that's why he filled his life with these little details of bourgeois or even aristocratic sense, like, letting the nail on his little finger grow because that reminded him and maybe made people remind of the fact that the rich ones, that the powerful ones in a place called China were like him, or he was like them. Okay, we can go on the poems. Mi padre recordaba con orgullo que había sido el segundo de la clase. Como en sus tiempos escolares se disponía a los alumnos en el aula según su mayor o menor aplicación, él ocupaba un pupitre delantero acorde con su jerarquía, pero ni siquiera pudo acabar la educación primaria. Estalló la guerra.
My father recalled with pride that he'd been second in his class. In his time, pupils were seated in the classroom according to their efforts. So he had a desk in the front row, but he didn't even complete primary school. The war broke out.
The war was the main event in my father's life, the Spanish Civil War, and it weighed on him all his life long. And again, the fact that he was proud of having been the second one in class also belonged to that idea that I just mentioned about the social class he belonged to. He was very aware that he had been born and had been raised in a very humble and uneducated family. But he didn't like that. And he always expected to move up. He always expected to be more. He always expected to become more intelligent, more educated, more cultured than he thought he was. And he transmitted that idea to me. So, which is, I'm not sure whether that was good or bad, but he transmitted that idea to me. Aún muerto, el sofá del comedor olía a él. En la cretona que lo recubría había canas suyas.
Even after his death, the sofa in the dining room smelt of him. We kept finding his hairs in the cretonne.
Yeah, in this book, I've also tried to mix times. So, I speak about the memories that I keep of my father, about my father, but I also write poems describing the moment of his death.
Yes, the juxtaposition is one of the strengths of the collection. It sort of can be shocking at times. You suddenly go to the mourning part after his death and dying, and then back to his life again.
Yeah, that's why. That's because I haven't kept a sort of chronological order in the poems in relationship with my father's life. You know, I don't start when he was born, and I don't finish when he was dead, when he died. So in this mixing of times comes also, or come these poems, you know, of my present moment when he was in the end dead. Okay. Mi padre me llevaba al campo a avistar liebres, conejos y pájaros. Yo era incapaz de distinguirlos, pero él reconocía a buitres y águilas, a halcones y milanos, a quebrantahuesos y azores. O eso decía.
My father took me out into the country to spot hares, rabbits, and birds. I couldn't tell one from the other, but he identified buzzards, eagles, hawks, kites, ospreys, sparrowhawks. Or so he said.
My father was actually a peasant exiled in a city. He had been born in a city in Barcelona, but mentally he was still a peasant because his family was, and his mother was, and almost everybody was. So he loved the countryside, and he loved to take me out just to stroll around, to walk around and see birds, plants, animals, insects, and streams. So I enjoyed that, and he did enjoy that too, even more than me. Mi padre vivía en la cama, llegaba a casa, se desnudaba y se acostaba. El cajón de su mesita de noche estaba lleno de pañuelos pringosos que ensuciaba con ruidosas regurgitaciones de mocos. Las zapatillas siempre quedaban al pie de las sábanas. Se las quitaba con sacudidas breves y rápidas.
My father lived in bed. He came home, took off all his clothes, and put himself to bed. His night table drawer was stuffed with snot-stained handkerchiefs from his frequent noisy nose-blowing. His slippers were always at the foot of the bed. He shook them off with practiced accuracy.
As you can see, and as Terence has mentioned before, I do not avoid sordid details. I do not avoid describing ugly realities of my father's daily life and therefore our family daily life. I didn't want to do that, although that has given me some problems. You know, some readers have made some reproaches sometimes, saying that I had been too bold, that I had been too maybe daring by doing so. I don't know. I felt that if I wanted to describe my father as I remember he was, I had to say these things, because these things were also him, but still are also myself. So I think of him in these terms, not only in the terms of this last poem, but in this sort of darker terms.
Okay. You apologize for that in a sense, and not apologize, but you mentioned that in all the epigraphs to your book, don't you, about that it was perhaps a terrible thing to do. I can't remember the epigraphs precisely, but you know which ones I mean.
Yeah, that's right. He's sometimes absurd in his opinions and little vanities, sometimes off-putting in his personal habits, angry, lost, pitiable, but often kind and wanting to pass on his erratic wisdom. En el campo pasábamos mucha sed. Descubrir agua era una aventura. El secreto consistía en llegar en los cañizares a donde la vegetación era más verde y alta. Allí había siempre un tollo.
Out in the country, we got very thirsty. Discovering water was an adventure. The secret lay in finding the places in the reed beds where the vegetation was taller and greener. There was always a water hole.
Yeah, the word tollo is a strange word in now. It's a strange word in Spanish because it's archaic. When my father said tollo, so we are looking for a tollo because we are thirsty, and the tollo will be there where the the reed beds have a higher vegetation. That word sort of struck me. I didn't really understand it. I mean, I did understand it, but it sounded strange. It sounded like belonging to a different world. And that's why I wrote it in italics, because I wanted to underline the fact that it's, as I said, for me, when I was a child, it was a kind of strange word. Lo envolvieron en un sudario. Lo besé en la frente. Estaba helado.
They wrapped him in a shroud. I kissed him on his forehead. It was ice cold.
Again, a poem about the moment of his death, or the day after his death. I do remember very powerfully this fact, the coldness of his forehead. Not even the rictus, not even, well, I do remember the rictus also, but especially what got stuck in my memory was this extreme coldness of his face. Mi padre era muy bueno haciendo muñequitos de plastilina. Moldeaba un cocodrilo o un burro o un pájaro y lo dejaba en la mesa del comedor. También dibujaba muy bien. En verano me escribía cartas que eran historietas, pequeños tebeos cuyos protagonistas éramos él y yo. Lo que esos personajes decían estaba plagado de faltas de ortografía.
My father was very good at making plasticine figurines. He modeled a crocodile or a donkey or a bird and left it on the dining room table. In summertime, he wrote me letters that were little stories, comic strips, whose characters were him and me. The speech bubbles were riddled with spelling mistakes.
I loved all this. I loved his plasticine figurines. I loved his comic strips letters. As a kid, I was, waiting for them. I was expecting them and waiting for them all the time. And I enjoy them. And I didn't pay attention to the spelling mistakes at the moment. But of course, I keep those letters. And after the moment of reading them, writing and reading them, that difference, as I mentioned, between what he was and what he wanted to be, also showed up very clearly in the fact that these funny stories, that these very worked stories contained so many mistakes. Mi padre tenía úlcera de estómago, tomaba pastillas, pero también vino y embutidos. Una vez lo vi caminar por el pasillo de casa como un oso enjaulado, retorciéndose de dolor. Como el pasillo era estrecho, golpeaba ambas paredes al mismo tiempo con los puños. ¿A dónde voy mañana? ¿A dónde voy? No dejaba de gritar. Se negaba a que lo viera el médico. Les tenía pavor a los médicos. Mi madre seguía cosiendo en el comedor.
My father had a stomach ulcer. He took pills, but also swilled wine and stuffed salami. Once I saw him walking up and down the corridor like a caged bear, racked with pain. The passage was narrow, and he struck both walls with his fists. Where am I going? Where am I going tomorrow? He yelled and yelled. He wouldn't go to the doctor. He was scared of them. My mother went on with her sewing in the dining room.
Well, yeah. My mother went on with her sewing in the dining room. I suppose that's the most important verse in this poem. Okay, let's move on, maybe. Mi padre me sentó una vez con él a la mesa del comedor para enseñarme lo que era la buena literatura. Me leyó y explicó el principio de una novela de Balzac, ya no recuerdo si Papá Goriot o La piel de Zapa. Me aburrí mucho, pero no se lo dije. Luego he sabido que Balzac escribía muy mal.
My father sat me down once at the dining room table to teach me what good literature was. He read and explained to me the beginning of a Balzac novel. I can't remember if it was Old Goriot or The Magic Skin. It was very boring, but I didn't tell him. Later, I found out that Balzac was a very bad writer.
Well, again, my father wanted to introduce me in the world of culture. So he wanted to introduce me into literature, into reading, into books, because he thought that that would make me more intelligent as he tried to be himself. I don't think he got, I mean, he did get me into the literature world, but I don't know if he was able to make me more intelligent by it. When I say that Balzac was a very bad writer, I'm saying that his style was not precisely high class style. He was a very good writer describing worlds, which is the most important part, I suppose, or one of the most important parts. But he was not a stylist.
Not a stylist, you're right, but a great writer nonetheless. Very exciting books.
Sure, yeah. But what I learned there with my father at the dining table, of course, we read a translation. We were not reading in French. You know, that helps to get maybe a wrong idea. But what I remember was boredom. So was saying, and this is what I'm supposed to like.
Yeah.
Anyway. A mi padre le dedicaron una misa en la iglesia vecina del hospital. Recé por él. Nunca he vuelto a pedir nada a ningún Dios.
A mass was held for my father in the church next to the hospital. I prayed for him. Since then, I haven't asked anything of any God.
Yeah, well, I decided that because we had been mildly religious at home, to say the most, mildly religious. And when he died, you know, I decided that I had nothing to do. I didn't want to have anything to do with an entity called God that, according to the books or to the book, gave us life, but also gave us death. So to ask anything of an entity which had created death. And I've kept that way, you know, that idea until now. A mi padre le gustaba jugar conmigo al ajedrez. Su pieza preferida era el caballo. Yo siempre le ganaba. Tras la segunda o tercera derrota, decía, venga, ahora voy a jugar en serio. Y volvía a ganarle.
My father liked to play me at chess. His favorite piece was the knight. I always beat him. After the second or third defeat in a row, he'd say, now I'm going to play to win. And I beat him again.
Yeah, that was it. Again, chess belonged to that world to which he wanted to belong. Because it was intellectual, it was an intellectual activity, it was a mental progress, it implied a mental progress. If you learn how to play and you played well, you would become more, you know, clever in a way. All right. Me pregunto si mi padre tuvo amantes.
I wonder if my father took lovers.
I still do. Mi padre conservaba con orgullo un libro de Álvaro de la Iglesia, una larga y cálida meada que el autor le había dedicado sin preguntarle siquiera el nombre, a mi amigo el del bar con afecto. Entonces mis padres tenían un bar, luego tuvieron una papelería. Yo he heredado el libro.
My father treasured a book by Álvaro de la Iglesia, A Long Warm Piss, that the author had dedicated to him without even asking his name. To my friend from the bar, with best wishes. Then my parents were barkeepers. Later they were stationers. I have inherited the book.
Yeah, well, as I said, my family was rather poor and very humble, and my parents had to take different business trades to survive and to give me an education. So they had a bookshop, very small one. They had a bar, small bar. They had different, as I said, different business to make a living. let's move on. Mi padre recordaba que uno de los oficiales que le mandaba en la mili, el teniente Lamarca, voluntario en la División Azul, había saltado de la trinchera nevada en Krasny Bor y atacado a los rusos con un palo.
My father remembered that one of his officers on military service, Lieutenant Lamarca, a volunteer in the Blue Division, had leapt from the snowy trenches in Krasny Bor and gone after the Russians with a piece of wood.
Yeah. La División Azul, the Blue Division, I suppose you all know, but the Blue Division was the aid that Franco gave the Nazi regime, military aid. It was a military unit with many thousands of people who went to Russia to fight the Russians there, because the communists had been the enemies of Franco in the Spanish Civil War. And when my father did his military service, he met a lieutenant who had been in this division and who had done this. Without unarmed, he had jumped out of the trenches and had assaulted the Russians with a stick. This book also pretends to, aims at being a sort of display or description of Franco's Spain. So of the world, the society that my father and my parents and myself, up to an age, had to live in, had to cope with, which was sordid, which was gloomy, which was dictatorial, of course, and which was awful. There was a very important Spanish writer called Vázquez Montalbán, who died quite many years ago, who said that in Franco's Spain, it seemed that everybody's feet smelled, you know, that everyone smelled to dirty socks. And this is a very good idea of the state of the country, in my opinion. I think it's a very precise metaphor of the state of things throughout 40 years. Mi padre guardaba algunas revistas pornográficas suecas en lo alto de un armario.
And my father kept Swedish pornographic magazines on the top of a wardrobe.
And I remember when I discovered them, I see myself on a ladder, not too high, on a small ladder, on top of it, just, you know, getting on top of the armchair, of the wardrobe, and seeing several books, several, you know, press papers, and a very surprising magazine with a very attractive, at that moment, at that point, lady on the cover page. And that sort of struck me because I had never thought that my father could have this sort of magazines at home, you know, but he did. And that has become a poem afterwards. Okay, we are getting to the end, which is this. Por mucho que me esfuerce, no consigo recordar nada más de mi padre.
However hard I try, that's all I can remember about my father.
I already said that this is not exactly true, but it is poetically true.
And of course, there are many other memories in the book that we haven't had time to read. We've read the beginning and the end of the book, but there are many more memories, touching and interesting ones in between.
Mi padre se llamaba Abel.
My father's name was Abel.
And that's it. That's the part of my reading. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, Terence. And now we are open to questions. I think we have some questions in our chat. Comments. Mario, well, it's a comment from Mario to thank you, Paul. The questions to the question that were put from somebody about the quotations of the German poet who is actually Paul Celan. The quotations on the poems that Mario Martín words. Any questions or comments are to our guests from our audience? So I have a question for both of you. You have both a long trajectory in poetry, but first to Mario, what brought you to this experiment with a language? And you mentioned also through the poems that you read, this intersiding with German and French and other languages. Of course, this has been made, it's obvious, with the intention to include foreign languages, but do you think it gives a special meaning to the whole poem? It might not be in some moment like a barrier for the readers. Actually, those are two questions for you, Mario. And to Eduardo, you said at the beginning that this book is very different from the previous ones that you had written, and it's because of the theme, your memories of your father, or because of at this moment of your trajectory you needed just a change of your style or the things you're taking or analyzing in your poetry?
Well, me first, yeah. Okay, yeah, like the foreign, well, first the second question, like the foreign language a barrier for the reader. Well, I hope not. Anyway, the readership for poetry is so small that I think it doesn't make so great difference. But in any case, I feel like the poetry is like the genre, the way where we can express our, like, to the limits ourselves. And if I feel, in any case, the foreign words are not so many in my poetry. And in this case, when for example, I use rancœur avec le cœur, heart, corazón, in these words, it's like really not so difficult words. It's like one word, and it's like if I use another language, it's because I cannot say in my language in the same way. And that's the question. And well, in these lines by Celan, is like these poems, yeah, were born in dialogue with Celan, and that was the reason. It's not like I want to give it a exotic meaning or something like this. But I remember, for example, Ezra Pound uses sometimes like Chinese ideograms well, I'm not going so far like him in this way, no. But Pound says for him it has an ornamental value, this ideogram, and for me it's not at all that. Is like, when I use a French or a German word, is because it came that way, and it came not. I cannot say the same in Spanish, but on the other hand, I think my poetry is deeply Spanish because it brings the Spanish language to some limits. Well. That's my opinion, at least. And the other question that was, in fact, the first question is like how I began to write in this way. It came like, well, not an epiphany, but kind of, because I was like thinking a poem, and I had I think the first poem that I wrote this way. I was in a bus stop in my faculty. I didn't have a car in that time. Well, but the boring times are very fertile, very productive for poetry, and we don't have a smartphone at that time. And I thought a line, image, but it came another. I don't remember which one, but it was a poem in Latidos y Desplantes, and well, I write it this way, and it came in, then began the whole thing. Yeah, now it's like it's not separable, not integrating part of my poetry. There are people who like it and people who doesn't like it, like every poet.
I find personally, I found it really great. And for the first idea, the second question that you answer, the first, I agree very much with you. It's something that I feel also, that there are ideas or feelings that are very much well explained or expressed in one language than the others. You can translate it, but the feeling is not the same. That's what I feel. For example, I have the experience also in German or in French or other languages that you might speak. And there are some ideas or feelings that are very, very much linked, not linked, in other words, are expressed through that language and not through the other. That's my experience, and in the sense that what you have mentioned.
I think Mario should put a few English words in as well. That would help the translator.
Thank you. So, Eduardo?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned in the beginning, I felt I had to write this book in the way I've written it. It was written in 2016, so already 6 years ago. And it was written, and this is a sort of public confession, it was written in a weekend. So it was written in 48 hours, which doesn't mean that it's exactly as it was on Monday, on next Monday. So from 2016, I've worked on it. I've changed things, I've corrected things, I've polished the book. I've added even some poems. So as Terence knows, because I sent him different versions or some additions. But mainly, it was written in 48 hours. While I tend to spend a long time writing my books. I mean, I may be writing a book for years, literally, but this one came out in 2 days. Why? I have no idea. Well, I do have an idea that I've mentioned before. I had been processing this book. I had been sort of digesting the figure of my father and his death for 30 years. My father died in 1988, and I wrote this book in 2016. That makes almost 30 years, 28 years. And I had written nothing or almost nothing about my father in 28 years. And I felt the need of writing that book as it is. Because I didn't want to, I wanted to recover the figure, the body of my father. I wanted to recover his life. I wanted to be again with him, as I suppose that any son wants with his father, or daughter wants with his father. So the way I felt, because it was not rational, it was just a movement. The way I found to try to do that was getting all literary artifices out of the poem. I know I am not being precise, because not all literary artifacts or artifices are out of the book. Actually, if they were, we wouldn't have a poetry book we wouldn't present it this afternoon. So this is still literature, and I want it to be literature, and I'm happy it is literature, but not the kind of literature that I had written until then, which had been in a much more traditional way, traditional according to the contemporary rules of literary creation. I wanted not to have adjectives. I wanted not to have metaphors, as few as possible. I wanted to have nothing that a reader could immediately identify with a literary resource or means. So to try to get to the core, to the flesh of that person, which was moving me to write about him. So that's it. That's what I can answer to your question.
Thank you very much. So we have some comments. Helen Jagger said, "Thank you, Mario, for your wit and good wordplay that Terry has brought." Sorry, I can read. Has brought alive in English, and to Eduardo, whose work spoke to me very strongly following my own father's death. I appreciate the honesty of the memories, even if it caused you some difficulties. From Joe Walmer, wonderful poems and brilliant translations. Terence, both poets had good English, so they leave you free rein to translate, or whether any discussions between you during that process? That is a question, not a comment, sorry. Both poets had good English, so did they leave you free rein to translate, or were there any discussion between you during that process?
Yeah, there's a great deal of discussion. I always send batches of the translation, and I get a great deal of help. Sometimes one makes mistakes and they're corrected, because Eduardo and Mario both have excellent English, and sometimes we can quarrel about things. And I think what I've put in English is a good translation and sounds good, so I'd rather keep it. So sometimes I insist on what I have, but other times I give in to what Eduardo or Mario might suggest, because it seems to me they have their point of view too. So it's a negotiation.
So you have built the whole translation together in a sense.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to what Terence has just said, that this great deal of discussion that he says he's had, well, I suspect that he's had it mainly with Mario. First, because his poetry is, in quotation marks, in this book, more complicated than mine in this book. And second, because, well, Mario does too, probably, but I trust Terence totally. I mean, there are two kinds of authors when it comes to the point of being translated. The author that is suspectful, the author that does not trust the translator and just keeps an eye constantly on his choices and options and decisions. And then there is this other kind of author who just trusts him fully, totally, and just his decisions, except that you find a mistake, which can always happen, of course. Unless that case, in my case, I've always fully trusted Terence, and he knows it. So even if he changes a word, because he's a kind of freer translator, and I know Terence since like 7 or 8 years ago, and I've seen many translations by him, not only mine, of course. And he's this type of translator who likes to get a little bit farther away from the original than other translators, to make convincing pieces in English, in this case, And I accept that, and as far as I'm concerned, I respect that. And even when he changes words in my poems, sometimes I do tell him, no, rather have the original one. But sometimes I just, trust that he's chosen the best option for the English poem, which is his actually.
Yeah, that's right. Eduardo is absolutely right that we're looking to be as accurate as possible to reproduce the Spanish, but it can't be. Some Spanish poets I've worked with would rather I just wrote down the Spanish again on the page because they don't really understand what I'm doing in the English. They don't. But Eduardo understands that I'm trying to make an English poem, and that's what I'm trying to do as well.
Right.
Okay, and then we have David Hunter. A question for both poets. Are you finished with the subject matter you explore here so smoothly, or will you find reason to come back to it? Do you think? I mean, if you had, let's say, finished with the subject of the books, or you will come back to it again?
Mario, tú respondes.
I think we will never be finished so long we are alive, hopefully.
No, but the subject of the books, but poetry, the subjects are always...
It's complicated to speak about subjects in poetry because the subject and the writing are so mixed together. Which is the subject or surrendering? Is love or is the writing? Because it's both of them. Well, I think, well, it's true that it's mainly a poetry about love. I remember even the publishing house, Shearman, in the Valentine's Day, make choose this book 2 years ago, but in my last book, the Encanto is not only about love, a lot of subjects. So in my case, with the bride, not finished, but I expanded to other subjects in the other books that are not translated into English. This is the only one, but yes, I'm not finished with this subject, so to say. Eduardo.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the subject is finished. So I do not have the idea of going back to my father's subject. I've said what I wanted to say, and I am glad about the books in Spanish and in English that have appeared. So nowadays, I do not intend to go back to the subject. But maybe in 10 years, I will feel again the need of writing about my father. I don't know, but so far, no, I'm happy where I am.
Okay. So the last question from Manus Odraya. Hola, Eduardo y Mario. Congratulations on your 2 wonderful books and amazing translations. On the surface, they are very different styles, but I noticed that both collections, the graphical layout, the directness of Eduardo's poems, the difficulty of Mario's, what we traditionally understand by lyric poetry. Is this intentional, and does it place you in a specific space within Spanish poetry? It's a rather difficult question. Maybe, Terence, you can give some more.
Well, it's both collections. Resist was left out, I think, was it? So he's saying that neither of them are what we traditionally understand by lyric poetry. I wouldn't say that. I would say that Mario's poetry is very lyric. It's language poetry, but it's definitely lyric poetry. And Eduardo's poetry is prose poems as literature. I mean, very literary prose poems. I mean, not consciously literary, but because there's so many techniques involved, like juxtaposition and like laconicism, recognizably a very literary book, but not in a showy sort of way. But Is it intentional? Well, the poets would have to answer that, but I mean, they are writing what they're writing. Eduardo writes in many different styles, in many different forms. He writes formal verse, haikus, and free verse. He can do any style, but in this case, he's using prose poetry.
Maybe Eduardo and Mario, you want to add something about this question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow what Terence was saying by adding that I may write in several different styles, but not in Mario's style. And that's what I wanted to say when the question, does it place you in a specific space within Spanish poetry? This book does not place me in a special space. It belongs to a tradition, in a way also very realistic, very figurative. So it does not place me in a specific space. I didn't want for anybody to place me in a specific place with this book. But Mario's is certainly placed in a specific space in Spanish poetry, because as I've written somewhere, he's as far as I know, he's probably the only one or the best one in doing what he does. That breaking of words, that mixing words, which lead to different meanings, which lead to different interpretations, those dismantling words and verses. So I do think that he occupies a specific space within Spanish poetry in his book, in his work in general, and in this book in particular.
Mario, you want to add something, maybe?
Well, thank you to Eduardo, who, he has, in fact, I got to know Eduardo because I sent to him my first book, Latidos y Desplantes, and he was so generous that without knowing me, he answered me a letter, and he wrote a really insightful review. And well, I think he's probably the best analyst of my poetry. And well, I analyze his poetry too, nearly every book he publishes. But yeah, I think we have very personal writing, both of us, and we are not in some school or current. And well, I have always the impression, I don't know if you agree, that in Spanish contemporary poetry, most of the poetry which gets publicity is I don't know how to say, a little bit conservative aesthetically. So you see I got publicity in the UK in a, so to say, first division publishing house, and in Spain it's not the case. So they are like smaller publishing house, like if we say the big ones publishes not so experimentalist or rupturist poetry. And I regret that. I don't know. Well, I had some ideas, but they will give for a conference we are not in a group. In our generation, we have, as I told, very personal writing. But for me, I look. That's what I look to in other poets, a personal voice, not a current, not a school, not to see confirming some current, but a difference or a difference, come the reader say. Yeah, that would be about the space in.
Thank you. The last question, it's a comment and also question from Lauren Shearman. And this question is for Eduardo. How did you resist the temptation to elaborate and wax poetical? Did you let yourself write freely and then prune away the adjectives and metaphors, or did you make yourself stick to very simple direct language during the initial writing process? And then a comment. It is almost seems like you will have to get into particular states of mind in order to write in such a naked and honest way.
I stuck to very simple direct language. So I did not write and then get rid of the things that I thought were superfluous or could be, thrown away. From the very beginning, from the very first moment, I tried to write in the way I wanted to. And I tried to stick to very simple words which carried as nakedly as possible the idea, the feelings, and the memories that I wanted to make poems. So the correction process that I mentioned before was just punctuation, a word, change one word for another, maybe adding a poem, just 2 more lines, this sort of things. But always from the very beginning to the very end in a very direct and naked way. So that's the way I thought. And that's the way I did. And when you talk about the particular state of mind, I suppose I was in a particular state of mind. But as I said, I don't remember it now because the book was written 7 or 8 years ago. But I guess I was. It was a sort of a trance that I fell into, that I forced myself to fall into in order to write the whole book, being consistent in style, in time, in rhythm, in everything. So that's what I can say. I usually don't work this way because, as I mentioned again, I correct a lot, and actually I add things in my normal way of writing. Many people say when I correct my poems, I cut things, I get rid of things. In my case, most of the times, it's the opposite. So each line or lines give me ideas to write more lines. So I add things, I tend to add things, but not in this book. In this book, it was just from the beginning in a way and try to stick to that way and be consistent to it.
Very special, yeah. Also written, as you mentioned, in a very, very short time after a process, a very long process. At certain, we could say maybe like a catharsis or something like that. So the last is not a question, just a comment from Paul Hoggett, who is someone who attend our poetry readings regularly. I know him by name now. And he says, brilliant evening, thank you very much. I will buy both books and look forward to also reading more from both of these poets. So, muchísimas gracias, Eduardo, Mario, Terence. Ha sido realmente muy interesante. Creo que hemos disfrutado todos muchísimo. El público, me permito ahora hablar un poco en español. También hay muchos oyentes que quizá no hablen, pero entienden el castellano. Y quería también saludaros y daros las gracias en español. Thank you very much, Mario, Eduardo, Terence. It was a great, fantastic evening with poetry. We have felt the strength of your poetry, and it has been a great honor and a great pleasure to have you tonight, this evening, although soon in Cervantes, Manchester and Leeds. I hope to have you soon again. Thank you. And thank you to our audience, of course, to everybody for being with us tonight.
Muchas gracias a vosotros y a todos los asistentes, y a Mario y a Terence, evidentemente. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Gracias a todos, ¿no? Ha sido un placer, ¿no? A Terence, a Eduardo, a Pedro, y bueno, y hasta la próxima, que haya una próxima.
Sí. Fortunately, we have a very committed and very trusted audience with the poetry. That is a sort of tradition now after a couple of years in Cervantes, Manchester and Leeds. So we are very happy. And also the audience, everybody is very happy. Thank you, Terence.
Thank you.